Welcome to the French Chef. I'm Julia Child. We're having a champagne and coffee party today in honor of the Queen of Sheba, who turns out to be none other than this dark beauty made of chocolate and almonds and rum and butter. Let's go into the kitchen and we're going to make the best chocolate cake you ever put in your mouth today on the French Chef.
The French Chef is made possible by a grant from the Polaroid Corporation and a grant from Hills Brothers Coffee Incorporated.
Whenever you're going to make a cake, and particularly a chocolate cake, one thing that you must be sure to do is to read the recipe first. Because if you don't, you might find that in the midst of the batter, you've got to rush out to the supermarket and get something, and that will never do. And so, when you read your recipe, you want to assemble all of your ingredients first, and then you can whip right through the cake very quickly. And I find it a very useful thing to have a great big tray, and then I put everything I need on the tray, and then I remove it as I take it off, and then if I've forgotten anything, it's still on the tray, and so I know something's missing. And for this cake, which is the Queen of Sheba, a chocolate almond cake, we need a 8-inch by 1.5 cake pan. And then we need chocolate and butter and flour and almond extract and rum and eggs. We needed 3 eggs. I've separated them both. And sugar. And so they're all on the tray, and we also need almonds. So they're all on the tray, and then we'll take them off as we go at it. And then when you're reading your recipe, there are always preliminaries that you have to go through. And in this one, you have to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. And be sure that you do that first, 350 degrees, and then arrange your rack. Most cakes bake in the middle level of the oven, so have the rack already. And then you're ready to go on to the next thing, and that usually is prepare the cake pan. And in almost all French cakes, you butter the pan first, and this means just take a little bit of butter in your fingers and go all over the pan, the bottom and the sides, and then put a little bit of flour in, and this is all so that the cake won't stick to the pan. Just about 2 or 3 tablespoons of flour, and then you shake it all around in the pan. And then turn it so that the flour goes all around the edges, and then knock out the excess flour in the sink. So there your pan is then all ready to go. And then, because this is a chocolate cake, we want tepid melted chocolate, and that has to go first. And we want 4 ounces of chocolate, and that would be, if you're using, it has to be semi-sweet baking chocolate, and you can use chocolate that comes in squares, and 4 squares would be 4 ounces. But I like to use these little semi-sweet chocolate bits. I found that they're much the best thing because they melt so quickly. And in most, well, anyway, in this recipe, we want to melt the chocolate in a liquid. We need 2 tablespoons of liquid, and you could use water, but the French practically never use water for anything unless they have to. Or you could use strong coffee. In that case, it would be 1 tablespoon of instant coffee melted or dissolved in 2 tablespoons of boiling water. But we're going to use rum, dark Jamaican rum, and we want 2 tablespoons of that, and it goes into a little pan, and 1 cupful is 1 tablespoon. This gives this cake its lovely flavor. And then we want 2/3 cup of chocolate bits. That would be 4 ounces. You know, melting chocolate is one It's a very important process, and you've got to do it properly because you want to be sure that the chocolate is soft and liquid and velvety looking. If it's hard, you can't fold it into your cake batter. And I find absolutely the best system is to take some water in a larger pan and get it very hot, and then take it off of heat, and then put your chocolate right in the pan, and then take a rubber spatula and stir it up a little bit, and then you can just leave it sit in the hot water, and by the time you're ready to use it, you stir it up again and it's fully melted. But I also find it's important to use a fairly thin pan. I'm using here a stainless steel one, or you could use a light aluminum one, but if you use a very heavy pan to put your chocolate in, sometimes the heat gets too hot and the chocolate becomes rather granular. Because heat, the chocolate melts over fairly low heats. You never want to use direct heat at all, or you get burned and granular chocolate. I think if you use this method, you'll never have any trouble at all. And then we have flour to be measured, and we want 3/4 cup of cake flour. And depending on what kind of a recipe or book you're using, they always have various ways of measuring flour. And this recipe, the flour is measured as follows. This is cake flour, and be sure when you buy cake flour, be sure when you buy the flour, it says cake flour, and that it's plain flour that doesn't have any baking powder or anything else in it. And then take dry measure cups and put them on your wax paper, and then sift the flour in until the cup is overflowing. There's a 1/4 cup, and here's a 1/2 cup. And then take a straight edge knife and just sweep the flour off. And then you have, the flour measurement is very important, because if you have too much flour in, you get a very sort of tough cake that may not rise. And you have, in cakes, you have just enough flour, and that's all. So we have there the 3/4 cup of flour. And from now on, the rest of the recipe goes very fast once you have those preliminaries done. And we now have to cream some butter and sugar together, and you can do that all by hand, or you can do it in the machine. I'm going to do it in the machine because it's very fast to do. And we have here 1 stick, or 4 ounces, of soft, unsalted or sweet butter. And if you're going to cream flour and butter together, it goes much faster if the butter is soft. So the thing to do is to take the butter out ahead of time and let it get soft. But of course, in a machine, you can just put it all together and cream it. It just takes a little bit longer. But if you're going to do it by hand, let the butter soften and then just cream it. See, that butter was so soft it creamed very quickly. And when it's creamed, it just means that it's nice and fluffy like that. And then as soon as that's creamed together, you then want to add 3 egg yolks. And in this recipe, these are grated U.S. large eggs. And I've already separated them, and the egg yolks just go right in. And they get beaten up. And that's your first step. And this part you can do ahead of time if you want, and just beat it up again so that it's fairly nice and soft before you go on to the rest of your business. And if you're going to beat it by hand, and you happen to have butter that's hard that you've just taken out of the refrigerator, you can break it up and put it in a bowl and set it over a very low heat, and then just beat it until the butter is nice and soft, and then beat in the sugar. And if it's too soft, you can beat it over cold water, and that will cream up nicely. And then we have the rest of the ingredients which go in. We have our egg whites. We've already put in the yolks, and now we have 3 egg whites. And whenever I always have an extra bowl and an extra beater, because when you're going to beat egg whites, you have to be sure that the bowl and the beater are absolutely clean and dry. And so you wouldn't want to take all of this out and then wash the beater and wash the bowl. So it's much better to have an extra one. Now from this part on, your recipe has to whip right through. You can't stop. Now, and we're going to have 3 egg whites. And I'm going to beat them by machine, though I like to also beat them by hand. But I thought that there are certain tricks to beating egg whites by the machine, and I'd like you to see how they work. The first thing is, as I said before, be sure and have the beater absolutely clean and dry and the bowl absolutely clean and dry, and be sure that you don't have any egg yolks in your egg whites. Because if you do, you won't be able to beat your egg whites so that they will melt up the way they should. And then start the whites slowly at first. Even you'll notice on your machine it says start it very fast, but the thing is that you have to get the egg whites sort of mixed up and begin to foam slightly before you really do go into your heavy beating. And this takes, maybe a minute or two at moderate speed. I usually like to beat them by hand in this big bowl, but beating them in the machine works out very well if you follow this method. Now, if you can see now, those are beginning to foam, and let them foam just a little bit more. And then you want to add some cream of tartar and a little bit of salt. And you add the cream of tartar because that makes the egg whites keep their puff once they've puffed. And you want to have just a scant 1/4 teaspoon of cream of tartar and just a little pinch of salt. And those are foaming nicely, so now we can start beating harder. You want to be very careful when you're beating egg whites that you don't overbeat them. As you see now, you can see that they're beginning to hold their shape in the bowl. So they're almost ready to go. But so that they'll be a little bit stiff, we're going to beat in some sugar, about 2 tablespoons full. And this just gives them a slight added stiffness. And then as soon as you put them in your rubber spatula, you see they hold in the spatula like that, and they make this little point. Then they're done. And you don't want to beat over that amount, because if you do, you'll have you'll have dry egg whites, and they're supposed to be soft and velvety. And then that bowl comes out, and then I put the other one back in again. And then we're ready to add the final ingredients, the chocolate and so forth. And I'm going to see the chocolate now should be soft and melted. I'll just take it out of the water and we'll see how it is. And if by any chance you find that your chocolate has gotten granular and slightly lumpy, you can take a little bit of this hot water, about a teaspoonful, and pour it in, and then stir it around again. But it's terribly important for this recipe that the chocolate be just as liquid and smooth as possible, because if it's hard and granular, you're going to have a difficult time mixing it up into your batter. And this is supposed to be tepid so that you don't scramble your egg yolks in there. And that's nicely mixed up, and then we have almonds which go in, and I want to we have pulverized almonds, and you can see this is just an almond powder. These are blanched almonds like these, which are ground up, and you can get them. They come in a little sack already ground up. They're sometimes hard to find, and if you can't get them, you can blend them in an electric blender, or you can buy little nut graters. But they're used a great deal in French cooking. So I'm using 1/3 cup of these, and they go right in. Then, you see how convenient it is having this tray. I think I would have forgotten the almond extract if I hadn't had that on the tray. We want 1/4 teaspoon of that, and I'm just going to put 1/4 teaspoon as 1 capful. And you always add a little almond extract when you're having almonds because it gives you a little more taste of almond. I see I've got some that hasn't gone in there. And now we have the flour which goes in. That's 3/4 cup of flour. And you always put that in last, because if by any chance you find that the batter at this point is too stiff, you can then I'll tell you what you do after that. Now that's mixed up enough, so I'm going to take this beater off and then stir in the rest with a rubber spatula. But I want you to see that this batter at this point, because you've been very careful about melting your chocolate, the chocolate isn't stiff, it's been nice and soft, so the batter is quite soft. And this is just the way it should be, and that is the main reason that you want to be sure that once you're ready to go, that you go right through it, because if you put your chocolate in and then let the batter sit, the chocolate would harden up, and then when your next step, which is folding the egg whites, when you then fold the egg whites, you'd have a very difficult time doing it. And so now we're ready to fold the egg whites in. And this, as you notice, this cake has absolutely no baking powder or anything else in it. All the puffing and the lightness of the cake is due to the egg whites that have been perfectly beaten so that they're velvety. They're shiny. They're not dry. And also this next step, which is folding the egg whites in. And the first step is to take about 1/4 of the egg whites and put them in your bowl, and then just frankly stir them in. And by stirring them in, you're again lightening your batter. And then take the rest of the egg whites and just plop them right on top there. Then you have the folding business. And this is take your rubber spatula and you come right down and then down to the bottom of the bowl and right to the side of the bowl and out. And you see I'm bringing a little bit of that batter up over the egg whites. And the whole point of this is not to deflate the egg whites. And you don't want to overfold. And while I'm folding, I'm going to give you those ingredients again in case you didn't get them down. That's an 8 by 1.5 inch pan, 2/3 cup semi-sweet chocolate bits, or 4 ounces, 2 tablespoons rum, 1 stick unsalted butter, 2/3 cup granulated sugar, 3 egg yolks, 3 egg whites, 1/3 cup pulverized almonds, 1/4 teaspoon almond extract, and 3/4 cup sifted cake flour. Now, if your egg whites, you've beaten them so that they're too stiff and lumpy, sometimes you can't thoroughly fold them in. But in that case, do not overfold. You should, if they've been properly beaten, you won't have any little bits of white. But if you don't overfold, just remember your object is not to deflate your whites. And there, those are all folded. And we have this little bit on the edge of the spatula, which is for the cook. That's part of the recipe. And then, in they go into the pan. And there's still a little bit more there for the cook. And then run the batter all the way up around the edge of the pan. And this is so when you bake the cake and it puffs up, you won't have a puff in the middle. And then bang it down a little bit to settle, and then bake it immediately. And this goes into a 350-degree oven, and the rack is in the middle. And this should bake for about 25 minutes. I have one in here, which I hope is just done to the right consistency, because I want you to see exactly how it looks when it's done, because this is a special type of cake. It's moist. It's supposed to be slightly moist in the interior. And when you take it out of the oven, I've moved it over here so you could see it a little more, it's supposed to shake. You see it shakes very slightly in the pan. And then take a toothpick, and you want the outside part of it set. So put the toothpick in, and if it comes out clean, that's fine. That's the way it should be. But when you put it in the center part, the center's supposed to come out just a little bit with a little bit of chocolate on it. And that's the secret of this cake, that you have this central part in here that's fairly moist, and the outside part that has been set enough so that your toothpick comes out clean. And if you find that it still isn't set enough on the outside, just put it in the oven and bake it for 2 or 3 minutes more. In fact, I have, once in a while, I've wanted to be so careful that it is moist enough, I've taken it out too soon, and then I found that, well, in about 2 hours after it had cooled, that it was really a little bit too soft, so I baked it again. Of course, if you bake it again, you have to bake it about 20 minutes for it to come up again, but it'll puff up again, and then you do your test. But this, I think, is very much a matter of taste. After you've made it, you'll see how you like it. I know my colleague Simon Beck in Paris likes it moister than I do. But this is, the quality of it is its moistness. And then you want to let it cool in the pan for 10 minutes, and it will sink down just a little bit as it cools. But you want it to cool so it will set, and then it's ready to unmold. And take a little knife and run the knife all around the edge of the pan. And you notice that this crumbles a bit on top. That's normal. I think most chocolate cakes do. And running the knife around just loosens it from the end, and then turn it upside down, and it ought to come right out. Which it hasn't quite. I'll run the knife around again. I often seem to have trouble unmolding. But if you've properly buttered and floured the pan, it should come out nice. I think there, that's come out. And now you notice the difference in size between this French cake and most American cakes. This is a typical French cake, and it's just about 1.5 inches high. It makes it very easy to serve and ice, and then you don't have too much cake on the plate. And of course it looks rather crumbly now. But this has to, before you ice it, this has to cool off for about 2 hours. And here's this one has cooled off, and it looks quite crummy, but even a queen looks like anybody else until she gets her crown on. And the crown in this case is going to be some chocolate and butter glaze for our Queen of Sheba. And I have some more melted chocolate. This is chocolate that was melted just as the same way as the other. I've had it in its pan of hot water, and it's cooled off a little bit. But in this is terribly important when you're making the icing, that the chocolate be absolutely, see, that's lovely and smooth. And again, if you found that you could add a little bit, 2 or 3 more drops of liquid if it had gotten hard, but it has to be absolutely smooth and velvety. This was just the same chocolate that we did at the beginning, 2/3 cup of chocolate bits and 2 tablespoons of rum. And then this is a very simple icing. You beat in unsoftened, unsalted butter. And you beat it in by tablespoons full, and we want about 6 tablespoons. And the butter softens the chocolate. So if you just put plain melted chocolate on, it would be a rather hard icing, and this is a soft icing. And if your chocolate is fairly warm and your butter, even if your butter's fairly hard, it'll beat in easily. I think I have just about enough there, but this is I can't ice the cake with it because it's too soft, so in that case let it sit or beat it over cold water. I've got some ice and water here, and I'll just stir this around until it's thickened enough to set. This could be a little bit more set than this, but I'm going to ice it anyway. I'm going to put that to catch chocolate dribbles. And just pour that right over the cake. And then come all down the sides. This should really be a little more set than this. But I want you to see everything. But it certainly is one of the simplest icings there is. And then we're ready to decorate it. I'm going to put it on the plate, on its plate first. And then this can be decorated usually with almonds. I'll just do a very simple decoration of just whole blanched almonds. See, those pulverized almonds that we have were just almond powder made out of these blanched almonds. And blanching simply means taking that little outside skin off. The French do an awful lot of cooking with ground up nuts, and you can always buy them there. Now this cake, even you can freeze the cake after you've baked it and before you've iced it, or you can freeze it after the icing has cooled, and after the icing is cooled and set, you can then wrap it and freeze it. I've got a friend who baked one in June and served it in February, and everyone said it was perfectly delicious. Now I want you to see how this looks when cut and served. Because this really is, you'll find, a cake for all occasions. It's awfully good for dessert. You see there it has that little moist look in it, and it'll certainly would do wonders for a committee meeting. In fact, I think it's the best cake you've ever tasted. And that's all for today on The French Chef. This is Julia Child. Bon appétit.
The French Chef has been made possible by a grant from Hills Brothers Coffee Incorporated and a grant from the Polaroid Corporation.
Julia Child is co-author of the book Mastering the Art of French Cooking.